recess until the chair gets here.
Okay.
Right, thanks.
Did we meet all the legal requirements?
You have met all the,
Here we go.
you have met all the legal requirements.
This time, not a he or a she. It's very generally.
So how are things?
In the meantime, we'd like to divert all resources to District 3.
Back to order, and I'm going to first of all apologize for being late. I forgot traffic coming through Tallahassee is the way that it is. Daniel, I guess you got an earlier start than I did.
Yeah, I did.
Coming out of Quincy.
Somebody needs to do something about it.
I tell you, you would think this CRTPA could do something about that. You would think.
What's wrong with y'all?
It's good to see everybody. Welcome back from your break. Although I don't know it was much of a break. And I'm glad to see and hope at least that everybody weathered the storm well and has their utilities back on. You know, we were blessed in that regard, especially what the Caribbean islands are experiencing right now, right on the heels of Irma. So all we can do is pray for them and thank God that he blessed us to not feel the wrath that we could have had it just jogged left instead of right. So here we are, and we'll get the meeting started. Have we done the roll call?
No, sir, not yet.
Okay. If we could do the roll call. Wood? Roseanne?
Here.
You here?
I'm here.
She's here.
I am here.
I don't think the microphone.
Yolanda, if your mic's not working,
Yeah, we
I'll do
can't
the roll
hardly hear
call.
you over here.
Okay. Commissioner Wood,
Here?
Commissioner Barfield, Commissioner McMillan,
Here.
Commissioner Merritt,
Here.
Commissioner Villavisi, Commissioner Daly,
Here.
Commissioner Dozier, Commissioner Nick Maddox,
Me.
Commissioner Scott Maddox, Commissioner Nancy Miller, Chair Richardson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, we've got a quorum. Are there any agenda modifications, Mr. Executive Director?
Just one, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
on item 3D, I'll need to pull that for a separate vote. I need to make a clarification on what's in the agenda item on 3D.
Okay, 3D, and that is the Title VI and related federal requirements language? Okay, so 3D is being pulled, and where are we putting that now?
Under item 4.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that is a
Yeah.
consent item. Okay. So that will be 3D. All righty. Can I get a motion on the consent agenda?
Move consent.
Second.
As a motion and a second. Any questions? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay, Mr. Executive Director, that brings us to consent items pulled for discussion under item number 4, 3D.
Yes, sir. If you look in your agenda packet, the recommended action was to authorize the executive director to execute a contract addendum to include the amendments as required by Federal Highway. That actually should be authorized the chairman, since he was the original, you were the original signer on the
Okay.
contract rather than myself.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. That brings us to roll call vote agenda items under item number 5. 5A, the fiscal year 2018-22 Transportation Improvement Program. Mr.
Chairman,
Executive Director?
Mr. Burke will give you a brief overview of the item, and again, this will be a roll call vote.
Right.
Good afternoon, members. We are amending the fiscal year 18 to 22 TIP to reflect design funding for a portion of the Havana Middle School sidewalk project.
Motion to approve.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Any discussion? This is going to be a quick meeting, y'all. All in favor of the motion?
Roll call.
Oh, roll call, that's right. Okay.
You know what happens when you say that, Curtis?
Uh-oh.
Okay, where we at? My name's
We're,
coming up.
we're on 5A.
Halfway, three-quarters way done with the meeting.
Yay.
Yes, and this is a roll call vote.
Okay, Yolanda's microphone is still not working, so I'll do the
Mr.
roll
Attorney?
call. Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Barfield,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner McMillan,
Yes.
Commissioner Merritt,
Aye.
Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Dozier,
Aye.
Commissioner Nick Maddox, Commissioner Nancy Miller,
Yes.
Chair Richardson.
Yes.
By your vote, it passes.
Okay, according to the voice vote, the motion passes unanimously. That brings us to item number 6, which is CRTPA action. 6A is the 2017 Transportation Management Area Certification Report.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Executive Director.
I'd like to introduce Danielle Blackshear, and I had to look at your name tag to make sure it didn't say Cole. She recently got married. But Danielle's here to give you all a presentation on our certification that we completed earlier this year. So Danielle, I'll just turn it right over to you.
Okay. Yes. If you would, please.
We normally have what kind of action do you have? This seems what's already.
Right now, it says no.
Page up, these two, right?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Danielle Blackshear, and I am giving a hopefully brief presentation on the certification review findings that we found during the 2017 certification review that was conducted for the Tallahassee TMA, or the CRTPA.
Danielle, who are you with? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm with the Federal Highway Administration.
Okay, thank you.
Looking for the button, sorry. Okay, so as part of the quadrennial certification review, so it comes every 4 years, our federal team conducted a site visit and a public meeting on February 26th through March 1st, 2017. As part of our review team, it was myself, Stacy Blizzard, Federal Highway, Carrie Shepard, Federal Highway, Doug Roberts, Federal Highway, and Paris Orr, FTA. We found 2 noteworthy practices, 6 corrective actions, and 11 recommendations. And so as I go through the presentation, I'll explain what each of those mean. And our report was signed June 15th, 2017. We initially had a deadline of June 30th, so we were a little bit early.
Okay.
Okay. So first I will go into noteworthy practices. And noteworthy practices are basically exemplary things that the MPO is doing that we noted. And so the first one is for planning and environment. We noted that the CRTPA had excellent visualization and robust mapping techniques identifying environmentally and socially sensitive areas in the CRTPA region. The maps were easy to read and provide a holistic pictures of the region's diversity of resources. So kudos to y'all. The next noteworthy practice was for the long-range transportation plan. They used the online MetroQuest survey tool during the development of the 2040 RMP, and this was very effective at creating trust and transparency and accurately indicating the public desires and perceptions. So bravo. Okay, so next I will go into corrective actions. And so I just want to make a note that corrective actions aren't the end of the world. They're not meaning that the CRTPA is failing in any sort of way. It's simply that based on regulations, these are certain things that need to be improved. So I'll go through each of the corrective actions, and Greg also recently provided several updates as to kind of where we are along this process, so I'll go through those as well.
Okay, and we'll ask him to give us that update when you're done.
When you were done, okay, perfect. All right, so the first one was for transit. So in accordance with CFR 450-332, the state public transportation operators and the MPO shall cooperatively develop a listing of projects for which federal funds were obligated in the preceding year. We found that no transit projects were included in the annual listing of obligated projects. So we requested that they include the transit projects in the listing by July 31st, 2017. Next, we had a corrective action for Title VI. We reviewed a sample of federally assisted contracts to determine whether DBE assurance language from 49 CFR 2613 and non-discrimination clauses from the subrecipient assurance were included. We found that neither the request for qualifications nor the general planning consultant agreements provided by the CRTPA contain the required information. So the CRTPA must conduct a review of procurement processes and documents and add required legal language by September 30th, 2017. All right. Okay, next we have public participation. According to 23 CFR 450-316A1, the MPO shall develop the participation plan in consultation with all interested parties and shall, at minimum, describe explicit procedures, strategies, and desired outcomes. So the public participation plan lacked explicit procedures and strategies, and we required that this be added by February 2018. So essentially, we were looking for how the TPA coordinates with statewide transportation public involvement and consultation processes, the timeframes for public notice and comment periods for the TPA's projects, how planning projects were amended, including public comments, how public comments are received and evaluated, both before and after amendment execution, and then finally, exactly how the TPA considered and responded to public comments on planning projects. Okay. Next, we had a corrective action for linking planning and environment. So in accordance with CFR 450-322 F7, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan shall at minimum include a discussion of types of potential environmental mitigation activities and potential areas to carry out these activities, including activities that may have the greatest potential to restore and maintain the environmental functions affected by the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So that's a mouthful. But essentially, the CRTPA adopts a general policy of avoidance. And so while this is good, the RMP must also consider other strategies and activities that may be used in the case that environmentally or socially sensitive areas cannot be avoided. And so we recommended that this be completed by December 31st, 2017, or we not recommended, we required. Okay. Next, we have the congestion management process. As identified by 23 CFR 450-320 C6, the CMP needs to contain evaluation measures that must be used to provide feedback to determine the effectiveness of strategies in the CMP. The plan had not been updated since 2013 and did not provide analysis that reflects the results of the evaluation and how it has or will guide the selection and use of strategies for future implementation. We required that the CMP must identify evaluation measures and the CRTPA must conduct an evaluation by December 31st, 2018. And then lastly, we had a corrective action for the Transportation Improvement Program. During the development of the 2016-2017 to 2020-2021 TIP, FHWA provided several critical comments to the CRTPA. However, these comments were not initially addressed. The comments related to fiscal constraint demonstration, documentation and response to public comments, and inclusion of project descriptions, lead agencies, and LRTP references. But I did want to make special note that during the certification review that this was addressed. The current tip that they had did address all the critical comments, and so this corrective action was simply for documentation purposes, but had already been resolved. All right, and so now we will move into recommendations. And so recommendations are simply things that we noted during the certification review to improve the planning process. So there's no dates for implementation, but however, we do require that the MPO provide a good faith effort to address some of these recommendations during the next certification review. So the first one is for the MPO planning structure. FHWA is currently a non-voting advisory member of the CRTPA Policy Board. Now, while I love you all, this is not the typical structure of an MPO policy board, and so we recommend that we politely be removed from the policy board.
Okay.
Next, we have agreements. So several agreements we noted were out of date. So we recommended that the CRTPA periodically review and update their agreements. Also, agreements are currently made available upon request, but it may be helpful to publish the agreements on the website to increase transparency for the public. For the Intelligent Transportation System, we recommended that the CRTPA resume an active partnership with the Tallahassee Advanced Transportation Management System, or TATMAS, and FDOT during RMP and TIP updates so that projects remain consistent with the regional ITS architecture. We had two recommendations for freight. The first, FAST Act placed an increased importance on incorporating freight providers and stakeholders in the planning process. We recommend that the CRTPA seek opportunities to attend freight industry meetings to educate them on the TPA process and help explain freight's unique perspective in the transportation planning process. Next, the 2040 RMP should include an analysis of the impacts of freight movements to the transportation system, as well as multimodal freight needs for continued economic development and growth in the region. As for security, the CRTPA participates in COOP tests conducted by Tallahassee City Hall. We recommend that the CRTPA conduct their own COOP tests to include assessing the ability of staff to telework and have access to key systems, as well as successfully process payroll and improve invoicing functions. So with Hurricane Irma recently happening, I hope you guys had a great COOP. Next, we have one for safety. The RMP should include a safety element that clearly incorporates or summarizes the priorities, goals, countermeasures of projects for the TPA contained in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. This was a recommendation from the last certification, so we just decided to include it. It's not required by regulation, but we just thought it would be something that would be good to consider again for this round. For the Unified Planning Work Program, as part of this certification, FHWA conducted a financial review of the CRTPA. While it appears that guidelines and procedures are in place to ensure general financial integrity, the CRTPA's internal control guidelines and administrative procedures manual are both out of date. So we just recommended that you all update those documents and conduct an annual or biennial review and risk assessment of the control environment. We had two recommendations for public participation. For the 2017 Public Participation Plan update, consider the following. Review the website to ensure that it is current and useful. And then also, the CRTPA currently discusses the outcome of each public participation activity after the event, but there is little evidence of how this information is used to improve the planning process. More fully document these outcomes and how public participation strategies have changed in response to evaluations. And we have another for Title VI. The CRTPA continues efforts to obtain better representation among underserved groups. We recommend that you extend this representation by partnering with schools, social service groups, and community organizations when selecting committee members. And so, like I said, that was long-winded and I had a lot, but we are officially done. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any
How'd they do?
questions?
How they
Mr.
do?
Merritt.
Overall, they did good. They were certified, so that's the most important part.
Okay, Commissioner Dozier.
You want to go first again?
I'm done.
You can go twice. It's okay. Thank you, Danielle, and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure on behalf of almost a year. Okay, so we just updated the last thing. Gotcha. Well, on the anniversary, congratulations. There you go. Okay, so I guess the first question is, I think I saw that some of the recommendations in the 2013 study, we were just now working on those. You referenced the TIP, and there was a few others. So you're feeling good, I'm guessing, that in the last year or 2 years, we've made a whole lot of progress, not just on this round of recommendations, but on the past, same as DOT, others. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, and so, sorry, I don't know if I need to speak into this. Absolutely. So one of the things that we noted especially when it comes to recommendations, it's just making sure that you're putting forth that good faith effort. And I believe the CRTPA did absolutely do that. And so that's just something that we reiterate that you keep in mind as we move forward, is just the recommendations. They're sort of twofold. It's either they make your process better or they prevent you from having corrective actions in the future. And so we sort of transitioned from having one planner, and now I'm the new planner. So I'm definitely hoping to take a more active role to make sure that we have fewer recommendations as time goes on, and that we can have a stronger planning process.
And I'm sure that's the goal of Greg and everyone else as well.
Absolutely.
So the more specific questions I had, I think in our briefing, Greg, you mentioned website branding. That's coming up at the retreat. Excited about that. I know you've been focused on the public participation and the communication piece. The DBEs and then a couple of other pieces. I'm wondering if there's any alignment we could explore with OEV, the joint office for city and Leon County with minority and women small business. Just wondering if that's any assistance for us. We're doing the disparity study, those types of things. I know that doesn't cover all of the counties, but I wondered if that was a way to step up that communication or outreach.
I think it's a possibility. Keep in mind what they were focused on more so is the language in our contracts. Yes. There are certain federal clauses, and remember ours is a little different because we're primarily federally funded. Things like geographical preference, things like that. Ours are a little bit different from what the locals do, so to speak. So I think there's some opportunities, but keep in mind in that sense, we are a bit different than everybody else.
And I'm glad you said that because I know we had an issue a few years ago, some discussion about those differences, and we want to make sure it's the federal rules apply and not the local in that case. And Chris, you are now sitting at the table, which is fantastic with ARPC, and I noted a few times in this review some alignment with things we talk about at the Appalachia Regional Planning Council. You're doing a lot on disaster preparedness. That gets into a lot of the environmental issues. The freight has been a big thing, and I know the SEDS update, which is, let me see if I get this right, Comprehensive Economic Development Survey? Strategy. Okay, yeah. I was close. I've read it. I'm just wondering if there are ways to coordinate more, even though ARPC is a larger regional group. It does include all the counties that are on our board, and I think there could be some strong alignment with what we're working on, particularly with Gaston County with the freight and other things, the foreign trade zone, those types of things. So just wondering if we could explore that in the future, and if either of you guys had thoughts about that.
That's one of the things, actually, Chris and I were talking earlier. You have what's called the ICAR agreement, which is intergovernmental coordination, and I'm blanking on what the AR is, but that's one of the things that we need to update, and that's really our main, or our formal documentation in terms of that type of coordination. And probably after the first of the year, I think we'll be back before you. The last one was done in the early 2000s. It still referenced Taltran and the Tallahassee and regional airport. So it would be between the CRTPA, the ARPC, Star Metro now, and the airport. So you'll see that, like I said, after the first of the year probably.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
And I touched base with Danielle, and we're going to have a little conversation offline to see where we can collaborate.
So we're on the right track?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Danielle.
You done?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Daly?
Mr. Chairman, do you have any public comments on this item?
On this particular item? Did we have any?
No, and this is not an action item. This was just for informational purposes.
So we don't need a motion to
No,
accept
sir.
the report?
No, sir.
Okay.
Great. But what I would like, Greg, if you would, is just maybe even a brief update for the board on where we are in addressing these recommendations.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of it we've talked about here, but
Right.
I think it would be good for us to have that in writing.
The first one as it relates to, I'm reading off the update I sent to Danielle on Friday.
Oh, okay.
As a matter of fact, the first one she mentioned, the list of obligated FTA projects. We do one every year for Federal Highway. That one's usually readily accessible from DOT. On the transit side, it's a little different, but we actually worked with Star Metro and FTA to develop that list, and that was actually finished up back in June and was included as part of the TIP that you all adopted in June. The update of the public participation plan, we're actually in process of that now. Probably would have something to you all back in, I'm hoping, January, February of next year for approval. and should meet that deadline with no problem. The Title VI, and as she mentioned, the DBE contract language, that's actually what you approved earlier as part of the consent, or the item that I pulled, that updated those contracts to include that language. The update to the RMP regarding linking and planning and environment, that's one we're kind of going through now and looking at some other MPOs, how they dealt with that. It's not a policy level issue, it's more of a documentation and kind of expanding the explanation that we have in there about some of how we treat some of the environmental impacts. So that'll be something, I don't know that we'll bring it back to the board as an action item,
Right.
but definitely would bring it back to you to let you know what we updated. Again,
Right.
It's more of a documentation exercise than a policy exercise. The congestion management process, we talked about this last year in the retreat. We actually executed a task work order with RS&H earlier this summer to do an update to our congestion management plan. Actually had a stakeholder meeting with all the local agencies about 6 weeks ago to get that kicked off. Probably anticipate completing that probably May or June of next year. And you'll get a more detailed update of that at the retreat next month.
Okay.
And then, as Danielle mentioned, the last item was the TIP. And again, that was addressed as part of the approval of the TIP that you all did back in June.
Okay.
I think that was all of them.
Now, will we need to take any action to remove the highway administration from the policy board?
We would have to go through and update the interlocal agreement.
Okay.
I don't think necessarily it's a pressing issue, because then you're talking about having to go back to all the individual boards to have it signed.
Okay.
If we want to do that, we can certainly do it, but I'd plan to wait until some point in the future when there's more things to update on that
Okay.
agreement as opposed to just that, and I'm assuming
Okay.
that would be.
Yeah, that's fine.
You could just stop showing up, too.
AWOL. AWOL. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Danielle or the executive director on?
Be a lot easier.
Okay. All right. That item was for information.
May I
Yes,
make another
Danielle.
comment? So, like, as Greg mentioned, he provided several updates to me on Friday. And so, for those of y'all who aren't familiar with the process, our office and FTA in conjunction will review some of those responses for the items that already had due dates and that have been officially completed. And we will issue formal correspondence back saying either this has been resolved, or we'll say, hey, we still are looking for, some more information or things of that sort, which I don't foresee. But usually we do issue, so for each corrective action that's resolved, we do issue formal correspondence letting you all know that it has been completed. And so we'll be working on this process through, I guess, December 2018 is the latest one. So you'll be hearing from me.
Okay.
In a good way.
In a good way.
Yes. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none, we will move on to item 6B, the executive director's annual evaluation. If you all will recall, you directed the executive committee during the summer to provide the first annual evaluation of our executive director. And that executive committee consisted of myself, Commissioner Barfield as immediate past chair, and Commissioner Nick Maddox as the incoming chair. And we developed an evaluation instrument. Do we have a copy of that? Or
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet, okay. So you all have had a chance to take a look at that evaluation instrument. Does anyone have any questions? I'll ask that first, and then I'll give the members of the executive committee an opportunity to talk about their individual evaluations if they'd like, and then the overall evaluation. Any questions? Commissioner Maddox, would you or Commissioner Barfield like to talk about your individual evaluations of the executive director?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a brief comment real quick. I just wanted to comment on Greg's, the job he's done. I mean, we'll look at just a couple of things that we've talked about for a long time that he's done immediately, one of which is just trying to align more with our planning departments, be it the city or the counties represented here, to try to make sure we're aligned and the funding that we have at CRTPA are used more so for the things that we're planning in our respective governments. Just doing that alone, to me, over the last year is an accomplishment in its own self. But if you just look at also just the way the organization is run, as well as I've had the opportunity firsthand to see him interact with the MPOACs around the state at our MPOAC conference meetings and things of that nature. He's doing a pretty doggone good job. So I was honored to give him the recommendation that I did, or the evaluation I did this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Barfield?
Yes, thank First of all, I'm glad that we have started this process. I know that this is the first time that we've actually given a review for executive director, and it was not painful, as most of them are. On the way that I took my review was I looked at always room for growth, and that is how I scored my review for Mr. Slay. And everybody has room for growth. I did make some comments at the end of my evaluation and submitted those also. Overall, I do believe that Greg's doing a good job. I appreciate the work that he's been doing with Florida Department of Transportation and bridging that relationship with them. I like the way that he's handling the staff and the recommendations that he has been making. I want to encourage you to continue doing a good job, communicate well with all of us and every one of us, and make sure that we stay on track. We continue to welcome you in our fold, and whatever we could do to help, we're there to support you and get you where you need to be.
Okay. Yeah, and I certainly concur with both Commissioner Maddox and Barfield in terms of the job that our executive director has done. I think that was one of the best choices that we could have made as a CRTPA in selecting Greg. He is very well respected, not only by the staff at the Florida Department of Transportation, at the federal level, of course, and with his colleagues throughout the state. I've heard many positive comments about Greg and the work that he's done. He's reorganized this organization, communicates with us, certainly more so than we had in the past, has updated our bylaws, has dug into the minutia to make the organization better and to make the processes better. And of course, there was always room to grow, but Greg came to us with such a wealth of background and experience. He wasn't new to the position or to the area, and so I had no problems with giving him outstanding evaluations in the areas that we were considering in that evaluation, and certainly thank him for all that he has done and what he's brought to this organization and how we've moved forward during his tenure. Any questions or comments from any of the other board members? Okay. Did we need to take action on this item, information?
Chair, no, you,
Mr. Attorney.
Don't need to take action. We had a discussion, I had to remember this myself, but we had a discussion that the executive director works at the will of the board.
Right.
And so by the board actually voting on it, you actually would diminish your authority to terminate or continue the hiring at your sole discretion. So it's just a review by the executive committee.
Okay, thank you. All right, then that takes us to the to item 6C, which Commissioner Maddox.
I don't know, we may have addressed this, we may not have, but who does the evaluation for council?
Legal counsel?
Yeah, he's doing a great job. I was just wondering if anybody does it. I'm not saying like, you are doing an amazing job. I would have gave you a glowing. I would have given you a glowing evaluation. It's just I know at the county at least we have an evaluation for both our administrator and our attorney as well. And so I'm not even suggesting that we do one. I just wanted to know if anybody was responsible for it. That's it.
Well, I under the bylaws, and by the way, thank you for saying that. I provide quality legal opinions.
Yes, you do.
But under the bylaws, what happened, if you remember Commissioner Crowley when he was here, you had an open-ended engagement for counsel. Okay. And Commissioner Crowley, and by statute, no governmental entity is required to bid out legal services or to have a termination provision. So from that standpoint, whatever you do is legal, just to be clear about that. So what the commission has done in its bylaws, it has basically the equivalent of a sunset provision where you have 3 years under the contract for counsel. And as was discussed at the meeting when your former executive director was here and Commissioner Crowley, it basically sunsets it for review, and then you can choose to reinitiate another 3-year contract, or you can bid it out at that time. My legal opinion is that you should not bid it out when that time comes.
Mr. Chair, my only concern there is if we do have legal counsel that's doing a good job, I mean, there's no guarantee that we'll all be here forever. I think the record should also show that legal counsel is doing a good job too. So boards and even FHWA, along with FDOT, can see that we not only have that opinion of our executive director, but we have that opinion of our counsel as well. That's it.
Okay, all right. You can sit back now, Mr. Chairman. There was no nefarious intent there. All right, Commissioner Maddox, thank you. All right, then that takes us to item 6C, the South Monroe Complete Streets Update, Mr. Executive Director.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Back in March of this year, we were approached by the Police Department about looking at the potential for a complete streets implementation on South Monroe. We've been working with Police over the last few months, and they've done the bulk of the work. I'll say that up front, but I wanted to present you today with an update as to where we are with that and kind of get some feedback on some of the concepts that have been developed. So Artie White's here from Place and is going to provide the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Artie White with the Tallahassee-Leon County Planning Department, here to provide an update on our South Monroe Complete Streets effort. As you know from previous updates, we are working very closely with the Florida Department of Transportation, District 3, and CRTPA to develop a corridor plan for the South Monroe corridor from Gale Avenue on the south all the way to Tennessee Street on the north. So that's the limits of the project. The purpose of this corridor plan would be to recognize the context in which South Monroe is located, try to find ways to accommodate all modes of transportation, all roadway users through that complete streets policy, and also include design elements from the Florida Design Manual, which is currently in draft form, but we can kind of be a guinea pig for how that actually plays out. South Monroe is a very important corridor. There's a lot of interest in this corridor at the moment. We have made a lot of investments in the area. We have also put into place a public policy framework so that as redevelopment occurs along this corridor, it looks more like the left side of this photo than the right side. You can actually see development occurring right now and what the corridor would look like moving forward. With this investment that has been made and this energy that you see in this corridor, there's been a lot of movement toward having a sense of place and identity that has really kind of come up from the grassroots level. It's really organic, and I think working through this process, we're recognizing a lot of that energy in the corridor. The Department of Transportation, through the implementation of their Complete Streets policy, has moved away from a dichotomy of urban versus rural to more of a spectrum from natural areas to rural areas and rural towns to more suburban development patterns to different urban areas, recognizing that each of these contexts have slightly different needs, and that will correspond to the Florida Design Manual having different recommendations and different design standards for each of these context zones. Looking at the South Monroe corridor, we have preliminarily done some assessments based on the characteristics of each of the context classification zones. We have areas in the South Monroe area where the land uses are a little bit more suburban in nature, building heights are a little bit lower, buildings are further away from the streets, there's parking in front of the buildings. As you move along the corridor, there are also areas where that changes, and you see buildings addressing the sidewalk a little bit differently. The parking is on the side or behind the building. Building heights are a little bit taller. You saw in the photo a moment ago, the Big Bend Care site is actually several stories tall versus only 1 story tall. And then as you progress along the corridor, you also see really more downtown development, moving away from parking lots to on-street parking, much taller buildings. The block lengths are shorter. You have a higher population and employment density. Many of the different characteristics that help define what each context classification zone is. Right now, we're trying to identify where the line is drawn for each context classification zone. This is very preliminary. We're going to be working with the department on where these lines are drawn, so this may change somewhat. But what we did was looked at the different characteristics and how they match up with context classification zones. We looked at constraints, right-of-way, underground utilities, and really decided where the corridor should look differently as you move along based on those contexts and the constraints. And this is a map of kind of where that breakdown is. The important thing is that the context classification will drive what the design standards are. So as you look at different context classifications, the sidewalk widths are going to differ, the lane widths will differ, how you include street trees will change. And so once we work with the department and clarify what the context classifications are for each area, we'll really start developing typical sections. This is very draft at the moment, but it kind of shows that there are opportunities to narrow down some lanes, enhance some of the bicycle facilities, address sidewalks a little bit differently. And this is what we'll be working on moving forward once the context classifications are in place. We do have a meeting on Friday with the department and CRTPA to go through the context classifications, make some of those refinements. At that point, we will actually sit down, put a lot more energy into developing the typical sections. We'll pull in other agencies and other partners and other departments as appropriate through that process. We'll be doing that through the fall with the intent of early 2018 coming back with a more defined plan, defined typical sections that we can use to move forward with how South Monroe grows and develops into the future. With that, I will answer any questions you may have.
What is the timeline for development, actual development, and what will the funding sources look like?
There are a couple of different timelines, if you will. We're working with the Department of Transportation on what the resurfacing schedule will be for South Monroe. Once we know that, we'll be able to address basically what happens between curb to curb, between the sidewalks. While that's happening, there are also development occurring along the corridor, so we'll be working with the developers as they come in to address basically from the sidewalk back to the building. Funding sources, probably a different variety of sources. We do know that there are brownfield grants available that will affect how development occurs. The CRA is a potential partner in this as well. The department, as well as Blueprint and general funds.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up, was the role of the CRA as one of the partners at the September 22nd meeting, or would you all bring them in later in the process?
We bring them in a little bit later. Right now we're working more through a technical process to identify context classification, but once we have that in place, we'll involve the CRA and other agencies for what the actual corridor will look like.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Artie, thank you for the presentation. That's great. As you're probably aware, in most of the planning literature, when we talk about complete streets, there's a great deal of shade involved. And one of the things that I've been concerned and building a big concern about is that we're putting in a lot of sidewalks with no vegetation. So I saw there that eventually you're going to get to the City Commission, and so in case that to divert all these comments, not having to make them over again in the spring, I'd like for you to really give serious attention to that fact. I know that we have utility issues under the sidewalks and so on and so forth, and in the past, for example, on Magnolia, it was brought up that the state didn't want us to plant trees in certain places, and I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that they're much more interested in the eventual outcome and the product we've got on the street at the end of the day. And frankly, it's not really inviting to people to go out there in our weather and walk down the street in the blazing sun. So On the other hand, if you go to the mall or any parking lot in town, all the cars are clustered under the little tree that's in the island. People gravitate toward shade. One thing that someone mentioned to me the other day was that when we're all having a conversation, eventually outside, we eventually end up moving over to where we're standing under the tree. So, emphasis on landscaping, emphasis on where the trees are appropriate. Of course, we're in the process of the urban forest master plan and identifying which trees are less likely to create havoc in storms, which we've been so lucky to have lately. And I just want to give you a heads up that this is really important to me in particular, and when you come back at the end of the day, I'd really like to see some more of that than we've been seeing in the past.
Absolutely, Commissioner.
And that's not to you. That's not necessarily, I don't mean more of that, what we've been seeing in the past from you, but I want to see more in the future as we go forward.
Not throwing shade, you're asking for shade. So you're not throwing shade, you're asking for shade.
I am actually demanding shade, so.
Absolutely, and this will absolutely be a point of discussion that we have with the Department of Transportation as we move forward.
Yeah. You know, one thing that has been impressive is the amount and level of cooperation that's been happening among all of these agencies as of late. And so that, I think, speaks well to where we are as a community and our governments working together from the federal down to our local governments. So, any other questions from board members?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Dozier, I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
I didn't see your.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Artie, and you teed me up perfectly, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I do think there's a lot of coordination, and I really appreciate that. I think it's evident in every meeting we sit in. I had a similar question about coordinating with CRA and others, so I knew that was on the docket. I was just wondering about when. The land use component of the comp plan for Leon County is under revision as well, and the context classification zones, that's interesting to me on whether or not we're aligning this with any work that you all are doing on the comp plan in general. I assume that you're looking at the same information for that larger revision as you are for any specific areas that we're digging into at this point. Is that right?
Absolutely. One of the directions we were given was to look at coordinating land use and transportation through that process. The context classification is actually a really great framework for addressing both land use and transportation at the same time. So these same concepts will go through both the complete streets effort as well as the comp plan rewrite.
And when we see the land use component come back in that discussion, there's not going to be any conflict, I assume, because it's all being coordinated by place.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the only other question I had was, and maybe I've misunderstood this, you said working with the developers who might come in, to the chair's question about when will the development start. I know that for the county, we've got design standards in Bannerman and a couple of other places. My understanding thus far is we haven't had that same kind of overlay for South Monroe yet. Are you intending to get there, or will this complete streets kind of give us that overlay, but from a different, process, I suppose?
This portion of the corridor is currently within the multimodal transportation district, so those design standards that are part of that apply, and one of the things that we'll be working with District 3 on is how do we reconcile some of the minor differences between that, and this process is a really good way of having that dialogue.
But we're also reviewing multimodal district as part of all this as well, so that could be tweaked as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Let me just follow up on that real quickly, because that was one of the things I was going to address. I noticed that the CarePoint building is being constructed based on the MMTD concept. I wasn't aware of the fact that MMTD extended to the South Monroe Street corridor. So all development going forward will have to be done according to the MMTD development standards. Is that correct?
That is correct. there are a few differences between DOT's design criteria and the MMTD, and we'll be having a dialogue and figuring out how we can kind of coordinate the two to allow development to occur in the best possible way.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Merritt.
Greg, you said this was done at the request of someone to help with the complete streets idea?
I
or
believe it initially came out of the city commission. Artie, correct me if I'm wrong, and then they brought it to us, and we had some discussions, and just kind of, like I said, just kind of get everybody in the same room to talk about it.
I don't know if this is the right time to say it, but I noticed the next presentation is also complete streets from DOT, and we in Wakulla, we just reviewed 30% plans for our road, getting 4-lane, and we're redoing a Crawfordville Town Plan with new comp plan, designate future land use designations and zoning, so whenever I can request help, then
Well, sure.
I'd like to do it, because we have an opportunity to not go back and retrofit something that was done not how somebody wanted it, but to go ahead and do it right the first time.
The reason I chuckled is Commissioner Richardson called me last night and said we've got two things of the same thing on the agenda, but this one is project specific. What Suzanne's going to talk about is more general DOT
Maybe I should say it
policy.
until then.
on that.
I just want to say that when we're building capacity, we will be implementing the complete streets, for example, 7-foot buffered bike lanes and sidewalks, automatically. Okay, that is going to be a component of all future capacity projects, as long as they're not at 100% plans or within the next just few years. So we're early enough on that, and those 30% plans, you should see that indicated, okay?
And I guess the difference would be with this South Monroe is they're actually looking at densities and land uses, whereas the complete streets don't address things like that.
Well, they do, and that goes back to the context part of it, but I think what we need to do is sit down and talk about it. Is there something specific you're looking for in Crawfordville or wherever, and see if we can't get that incorporated into, because I don't know, Suzanne, is that primarily a rural section or an urban section?
Urban through the middle of town.
Okay.
Yeah.
So but I think it'd probably be worth a look to sit down and just kind of see, and if there's something.
We'll take
you
whatever
wanna
help we can get. Let's put it like that.
Okay. All right, perfect segue. Suzanne, you want to give us your update? We're on item 7A.
You know I can't find it. Page down, okay. Actually, before I start on the complete streets, I would like to give 2 other updates, just to note you have information in front of you regarding a public meeting that is coming up on the design for Quincy Loop North. Now, this is the first public meeting on design. This is a statewide project, an accelerated project, so our PD&E is still ongoing, and we're starting to initiate the design concurrently. So we will be coming back to you with the final PD&E information, and at the same time, this is happening. So we just wanted to make sure you had this on your radar, because it is early October, October 10th. The next item I would like to make Commissioner Richardson aware of, and the whole board, is that the bike ped crossing on Adams Street, the 100% construction plans have been sent for review. I've asked Greg and Jack to look at those and make sure that everything is there. I found out that those poles for the ped crossings will take 6 months to deliver. We've already ordered them, and we anticipate construction will be starting the end of the year, early next year. Okay. So those are my other updates I wanted to provide as we get into the complete streets. The complete streets, I want you to think of it as the...
Suzanne?
I'm sorry.
What I want to do, but this is the crossing, for those of you who may not know, on South Adams, near the main post office, where the students disembark Star Metro, if you're headed south, on the left-hand side of the road, and then they have to cross that separated road on South Adams to get to the apartments on the other side. And often at night, when you're coming through there and they're standing in that island trying to cross over, cars can't see them. It's an accident waiting to happen. And so I'm really glad to hear that we're moving forward with getting that addressed.
Yes, and again,
The safety report identified that this was a significant issue, and therefore the safety funds, federal safety funds, are paying for this. And that's why it's not a project you see, for example, in your TIP. Thank you for the background to that. I kind of wanted to get right into the meat because I'm excited we're moving forward.
Thank you, Suzanne.
You're welcome. Thank you. With the Complete Streets, I want you to think of it as the right project at the right time in the right place. There is no one-size-fits-all. You and I can take the same corridor, and we can look at what's allowed in the design manual, and I may want on-street parking, and you may want bike lanes. I may want wider or narrower lanes so I can have a wider median. You may want us to keep the lanes at that width and have a smaller sidewalk. So we can, you can all take the same corridor and come out with 3 or 4 or 5 different results. So I just want to emphasize that, again, it's not a one-size-that-fits-all problem. If you're not familiar with the reason that we came up with the Complete Streets and the context classification document, it was based on our Complete Streets policy. The policy basically said we needed to find a way to improve our system and deliver transportation to all users. The Complete Streets classification is land use driven, and it will be coordinated with local governments. This is just the timeline of the process. In April of 2017, we put out the document in draft. Originally, we had called it the Complete Streets Handbook. It seemed to create some confusion, so we determined that we're going to just pull the meat of it out, which is the classification, and present at this time only the final FDOT context classification document, which I have provided a copy for you. This fall, we will have a workshop in the district to explain how District 3 is implementing it. We will reach out to all of our partners at the TPA, RPC, and with local governments, and really encourage your staff to come. The reason we developed the Complete Streets policy is because Florida is #1 in fatalities for bicycle and pedestrian, and this was not the #1 we wanted to be. So the Secretary developed this policy to promote safety, quality of life, and also to promote economic development. We want to serve all users, so the cyclists, the freight, motorists, pedestrians, and transit. As you saw previously, the context classification system is a transect system that goes from the rural to the urban. The most important difference from your typical transect system is that we recognize that you have 2 types of suburban development. You'll have suburban residential and suburban commercial. So we have created that, we broke that suburban, that C3, into those 2 categories to recognize the land uses there. Again, these are typically what you would find in those classifications. So, for example, C5 is the downtown Tallahassee. So it's an urban central. We have a mix of uses concentrated around a few blocks as economic center. Most importantly, there is no new funding with this policy. No money. Sorry, Betsy. However, we will be, it is a philosophy, it's not a funding program. We will program projects and fund them as they always have been. However, they now will include context classification, and it will increase the emphasis on partnerships and assembling funding packages. So, for example, on Woodville Highway, it was also a Blueprint project. Blueprint wanted some additional features to our widening project. We modified our plans to include these features, and we will have a partner, we'll have a JPA, an agreement for funding of those additional features that we included. If you would like a complete streets project to be funded as a project in and of itself, we will look for it to be prioritized through the TPA process and to be funded through the TPA process. So again, it doesn't mean that it cannot have state or other types of federal funds on it, but if you want to completely redevelop a corridor, it needs to be a project in and of itself. Enhancements beyond the FDOT standards will still require the local funding participation and a commitment to maintain those additional enhancements. Again, I said we're going to have our workshop in the fall. We'll be sending more information out. It should be sometime, we were hoping in early November. And at that time, as I said, we will explain how District 3 is going to implement complete streets. I will tell you that, for example, here in Tallahassee, we met with the CRTPA, and actually I have to credit the CRTPA for spearheading this, when we did the resurfacing project for North Monroe. Before that project started, they said, let's get together with blueprint, planning, let's sit down and see what enhancements we can add to that project. As a result, we have included some we extended the project limits to be able to connect to a bike lane that was north of John Knox Road. We had included some pedestrian safety refuge islands, and we looked at, we also extended our limits to include the safety project that is at Thomasville Road and Monroe Street. So as part of that project, we did some complete streets improvements, and there was no cost to the city. So, oh, excuse me, let me not forget that we also put the pattern pavements in at all four legs of the crosswalks. The city requested that at minimum, or the county requested at minimum, we replace what you had already put in. We actually went and included that on all parts of it, and nobody came to me and said, speak to them about getting money, so I didn't ask, and so that one, again, you'll find that we will fund some of that low-hanging fruit. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Okay, any questions for Commissioner Merritt?
Since this is a new funding source, do you use like go underground utilities in a downtown corridor?
No.
Had to ask.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, just one question.
Commissioner-
And it's actually not a question. I just want to say this is an excellent example of the newfound cooperation between the community and FDOT, and I credit all in the room who are responsible for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Susan.
Oh, Suzanne, we got another question for you. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your card up. Okay, Suzanne.
It's nice to see you, Dr. V. How may I help you?
Nice to be seen.
It's good to have you back.
Yes, since this is a new plan, is this something that we can request some sidewalk construction on for some of the roads in rural county?
Actually, your sidewalk projects would be, they would go through the same priority process that they do right now with the CRTPA or through the Safe Routes to School.
Okay.
So if we were coming in to widen a road, then we would look to include additional complete streets features of bike lanes and sidewalks at that time. If you just want to add sidewalks to an existing corridor, that would come through as a plan in and of itself.
So, okay,
A project, I'm sorry.
I talk with you about what I have in mind after the meeting.
Okay, but this again, emphasize cooperative partnership and process and dialogue. Okay, so we will look for every opportunity to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Mr. Executive Director, that takes us to item number 8, your report.
Mr. Chairman, just got a couple of things. Over the weekend, as we were or late last week, as we were trying to rush with a short week to get the agenda out, I realized that I did not include the CAFR report, which is our comprehensive annual financial report. That will be on your next meeting agenda for your review. There were a couple of issues, I think, that actually were the same ones that were identified in prior years, the timeliness of invoices, though I will say, invoices to DOT, though I will say I think we've dramatically improved that process over the last few months. But I just wanted to point that out. Normally it's on this agenda, but again, I forgot to include it on here. And then the next item was, I passed out a blue sheet for you all that gives you kind of an overview of the topics that we have planned for the retreat next month, and to give you an opportunity to take a look at that. And if there's anything you want to add to that, to let me know.
Anything we're going to vote on at that?
No, sir, it's a
Not
retreat,
at the
so
retreat,
it's more of a
yeah.
workshop.
Expect you may not have a quorum.
I know I'm not going to be there.
Is it conflicting with something?
No, just some people are lazy.
Oh, thank you.
9 to 1, I believe.
Yes, just about a half a day.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
We'll be presenting.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Dozier, and then
I was just going to soften up Commissioner Merritt's comments there. I think when we had a larger board, it was very hard to get full participation on the board. I think this board has been much more active and participating since we had those retreats a few years ago. We did have an issue with having participation. I think I see Nancy nodding. I think there was a few of us who attended a few years ago. And you were there, yes, sir. But I anticipate, I mean, with the size of this board now and the participation, I'm guessing,
So you're saying you'll be there too?
well, of course. But if you're not there, we're okay.
I know.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ouchie.
and they're sitting right next.
Could I point out that I think there was a moment in time today when every one of us was here.
It's a good point.
I mean, it didn't last long, but
I know I'm not going to be there, so, yeah.
you better have a good
So
excuse.
if you have any feedback for the agenda, Commissioner Barfield, if you would get
Okay.
that to
Thank you for
Greg or
bringing us
staff.
back into-
Is there a call-in opportunity? Can you call in?
I mean,
Why don't you send
if
us
you're
Eric?
not-
Look at that look. I know, I don't like it either.
Not for a
it's
retreat.
a possibility. How about that?
That's a long call in
It
from
is,
9 to
yeah.
1.
But I'm going to be traveling, I'll be on the road, so.
Okay. Commissioner Villabasier?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be able to make it also because teaching conflicts. I have classes, especially since Hurricane Irma have taken out some of our class time. We have to make up those times, so
Okay.
I will not be able to be there, but I will get information from the executive director as to what was discussed.
Okay.
Think about it.
Can you have someone to maybe sit in for you?
I will endeavor to do that at the county commission meeting today. I'm going to mention it to them, and let's see if we can get a representative from the county.
Okay. All right.
Was good?
But as I said, yeah, if there's any other topics you'd like to see discussed, please just let me know. I mean, we've got a pretty full agenda, but we can always cram some more in there if we need to.
Okay. Do we anticipate having lunch
Yes, sir.
since we're going to 1? Okay.
What's for lunch?
Fried chicken,
What about
We're working on
breakfast?
Collard green.
You need breakfast
macaroni
at
cheese.
Four Rivers is the front runner right now, so.
Okay.
Who is?
Four Rivers.
We have barbecue at the Regional
Excellent
Planning
barbecue.
Council meeting. That's been a huge hit.
Attendance is through the roof.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Sonny's
If that
barbecue.
helps.
No, it's Four Rivers.
Four Rivers
Okay.
barbecue. Okay, good. Good.
4 Rivers is it.
Yeah, I want to second that because that food is excellent. And so please follow up and find out where it comes from.
We used to have chicken salad that had the grapes in it for some reason.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Real food, and the attendance went way up.
Some healthy food.
Well, no, we could look at,
Artsy food.
we could look at quinoa and rice cakes if you prefer, so.
4 Rivers sounds good. I don't think you'll get any
I
objections.
think that answers our question about
Yes.
where to get lunch from, so.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Executive Director? Item 9 is CRTPA information, the Florida MOPAC agenda. Mr. Executive Director, did you have?
Just in there for information.
Just information. Did you want to give us an update on MOPAC and what's going on with that organization? Nothing at this point? Okay. I know I put you on the spot.
Taxes on mileage, right?
We've got, okay, so that brings us down to item
10.
Well, actually, 9D, well, we just talked about that, the future meeting date, the retreat on the 17th. So we're at item 10, where we are at that portion of the agenda where we take comments from the public. Do we have any speakers, Mr. Executive Director? Anyone who wanted, is there anyone who wants to address the board? Okay. There being none, we'll move on to item number 11, items from CRTPA board members. Are there any?
Yes, there is.
Okay, let me get Commissioner Barfield since she had her card up, and then Commissioner via BCA.
Yes, a couple of things. First of all, Suzanne, I want to commend the contractors on Highway 90 between the Leon County line, Jefferson, Leon County line, and Jefferson. The bike shoulders in Leon County now on Highway 90 are in place, and it is super sweet, and it's been a long time coming, and I know that we didn't have money, and just know that that is huge for our area there, and they are doing a fantastic job resurfacing. Fantastic. They are fixing culverts. They are just super good job, and I commend them, and my whole community's pleased. I'm pleased, and just a very good job. And I was going through Crawfordville, and I noticed in front of one of the little fast food stores, maybe Zaxby's, they've got one piece of sidewalk there, which I thought was great, and commend Wakulla County for getting those folks to put sidewalks in whenever they are building.
It's a longer story if you got me to tell it to you.
No.
We're actually not making them.
I want to go.
We're not making them put sidewalks in. We're actually letting them pay towards a pot because DOT's won't come tear them up in a couple of years anyway. So they actually put that in on their own, even though they already paid to not have to put it in.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's what is missing in Crawfordville, and
when that's part of our,
We will have a discussion.
we'll have
Yes.
sidewalks on both sides of the road.
I commend you for that. I really do. And I wasn't gonna mention, but I think I'm gonna mention now, I don't know what's going on with the federal infrastructure dollars that might be coming down from the president. Any word on that at all? Any update?
There's been nothing on that probably in 6 months or better.
Okay.
They moved on, if you watch the news, tax reform and everything else, but there has been no other discussion on an actual stimulus bill, whatever you want to whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
I haven't heard any.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner via BCA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to be an appeal or request to FDOT. There is a need for Gaston County Economic Development Council working with the Midway City Council to construct an economic development project, the 4-star freight liner off of that road just skipped my mind in where you have the Waffle House. The Brickyard. Brickyard. That's the name. Brickyard. The county have constructed the brand new road as well as give them the sewage and all for Freightliner to come, but we are having issue with FDOT with regards to cutting down the trees that will give access to Freightliner from I-10. So I thought I should bring that before FDOT so that we can do what can be done as to expedite giving that permission, because that is state property that we can just go and tear down the trees. So we need to expedite that so that this project can go on. We need that access directly from I-10 to Freightliner. That was one of the conditions with which we attracted them to Gaston County. So if there's anything that FDOT can do like yesterday to expedite that, if you need us to give, because tearing down those trees was actually a part of the design that got us to bring Freightliner to Gaston County. So, Suzanne, if we can look at that and get that done like yesterday, we will surely appreciate that. Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. V, I think I'll set up a meeting with you and Greg and I to sit down and talk about this, but may I clarify something? Are you talking about direct access from I-10 to their property?
Yes. Because when you, I can forward the plan to you. You have Freightliner coming from Brickyard, and then they didn't want an access from I-10 turning into their trucks, turning into their facility. We have done all we could. Now we are stuck on that I-10 possible way of turning into Freightliner. The trees there is what they are having problem with cutting down, and they cannot unless FDOT, I was told, give them that permission.
Dr. V, are the trees in DOT right away?
Yes, they are.
But you're not talking about a direct access to I-10. You're just talking about something back to, I'm assuming 90 or somewhere, or on a ramp. Yeah,
And let's get and talk with it. And I will also ask Jerry Koken, who is the principal dealer with Freightliner, to also be a part of it and see how we can resolve that as soon as humanly possible.
Okay. And we certainly want to get that taken care of, because it's going to be a very important project, economic development project for Gadsden County.
Yes.
Yes, I think we need to sit down and actually have a map in front of us and start to talk about it first. So I'll get with you afterwards about availability and see if we can't meet this week. Okay.
Okay.
That'll work.
Thank you.
Suzanne, do you want to go ahead since you've got your card up, and then Chris, I'll come back.
All I wanted to say was, when you started saying, well, I'm not sure about the October 17th meeting attendance, we will be presenting the work program, the draft tentative work program, at that meeting. So these are the potential projects that the candidate projects that we've programmed for fiscal year 19 through 23. However, and I forgot to mention this when I was up there, on October the 10th, we will be holding a public hearing on our draft tentative work program. This year, you will be able to attend that hearing either at Midway or from the comfort of your desk or your home, because we will be doing it via webinar as well. So I will be sending that information to Greg so that he can distribute it to you. There will be a 10-day public comment period after that, so that you can make comments at the public hearing afterwards, or even comments at our meeting that you would want to provide written comments that would become part of the public record. So I just want to let you know that that's on the horizon of early next month.
Give us October 10, what time?
For Midway and the eastern counties at 1 o'clock, but let me confirm that. I'm trying to think if I'm thinking in central or eastern time.
Thank you, Suzanne. Chris?
And I just wanted to speak briefly. Speaking of economic development in Gadsden County, last month, you might have heard of the establishment of the Gulf to Gadsden Freight Logistics Zone. So the tie into the CRTPA obviously is Gadsden County, but there's a lot of excitement in the 4 counties that are involved, and this all ties to the development of the Port St. Joe. So when the port comes back online, the Apalachicola Northern Railway, which runs through those 4 counties and up to Gadsden County, there is now a freight logistics zone established, which gives priority funding to those counties within that zone for funding to enhance projects along that freight line. So Gadsden County is positioned well for potentially an intermodal logistics center, an ILC, which basically, when the port's back up and running and freight is being run on that rail, it then eventually needs to move to CSX or to I-10, and Gadsden County's in great position. So just wanted to bring that to your attention and let you know that that's happening within the region, and it will have impacts.
Is there anything we can do, Chris, either as a board or individually, to support that effort to get that?
Yes. We had a press event in Hosford and saw Commissioner Barfield there, and one of the next questions was, how do we market this? And I think that'll be kind of the next discussion item, and when we get to that, I think the CRTPA would be a big help in that.
Okay. If you would bring that to us at the appropriate time and let us know how we can be involved.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't see whose card went up first. Yours, Daniel? Okay. Commissioner Merritt?
2 items. First, I'd like to thank all of my fellow CRTPA members who attended the groundbreaking for the Capital City to the Sea Trail. Betsy, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
I know a lot of y'all couldn't attend.
Secretary Gaynor was there, you know
Yes.
that, right?
Yes.
That's why I attended.
Oh. Thanks anyway. And we had a pretty good showing, mostly local people, but it was the official groundbreaking as Greg was there and CRTPA staff, and it was good. Next item, I talked to Greg about this, but next time we update the plan, I think it's going to be 2018 or
2019, 2020.
just a shot over the bow. I want to advocate again to 4-lane. We got funding for 319 from the county line south. I'd like to see us come back and look at going from Leon County line in Leon County to tie into the part that's already there. So
Tie into what?
the rest of to get into Tallahassee.
Okay.
The 4-lane's going to stop at Leon County line. I'd like it to continue all the way to Tallahassee.
Which road?
319, Crawford Highway.
Yeah, but that's what I needed, the
Yeah.
name. Thank you.
It's not even on the radar right now for the Leon County portion north, even though everybody that Tallahassee is trying to get to the coast is probably going to drive down that road. So, you know, we got Wakulla County on the radar, but the part that joins Tallahassee to Crawfordville is not. It's only like 2 or 3 miles. It's not very big.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, on that point, how'd that happen? I mean,
Environmental concerns, I think.
well, let's see if we can maybe have a brief update on that and what we might ought to do about that, because that's an evacuation route, and these days those are critically important. So it would be nice to know the history and where we are now and what we need to do proactively, or what we need, no, it's too late to be proactive, what we need to do to finish this off.
I asked Greg about doing a plan change, because I think when we ran the 2040 model, it didn't rank very high. I think around Oak Ridge Road there's a lot of wetlands, and I think that may have kind of tripped it up a little bit. But anyway, I just, fair warning, I want to bring it back up.
We had a conversation, the department asked us that question a couple of months ago, I guess, when we met, so that will be something we'll go back and look at. I think it made the needs assessment, but it didn't make the cost feasible plan. So, I mean, I think that probably dealt with, you know, how you are prioritizing projects at the time, but it's something we can go back to.
Maybe once the Wakulla County part is done, which they're going to start breaking ground second quarter of next year, then maybe that can push it up, because it just makes sense, because it, you know, Wakulla County and Leon County are symbiotic almost. You know, one reason your people want to live here is because they can get to the coast easy. And so
and does this go into Nicole's comment that our reaction to environmental mitigation is avoidance, and that's the only thing that we talk about? I mean, that sounds like that to me. Is that?
And I don't know if that's what kicked it down, but I think that's what it was.
Okay. Well, you don't have to go into any depth now. Those are just questions that I'd like to hear more about as we move into the next couple months.
Okay.
So whoever replaces me, if I don't win the election, make sure they advocate.
2018?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you want an update on that, Commissioner Miller, at our next?
At least
board
brief,
meeting?
just give us some history and
not at the
context,
retreat,
because
the
when
next-
this road is completed, it is going to look a little bit funny. And it'd be nice to know, maybe we need to focus.
Okay.
So that would be helpful.
So, Greg, if we could put that on our next board agenda, not the retreat.
Right.
The next board agenda. Okay. Anything else? Oh, Danielle, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to give you all an update that now that we have the new FAST Act performance measures and final rules and all that complicated stuff, Federal Highway is going to be reaching out to all the executive directors for our MPOs across the state to meet with them over the phone. So it'll be a phone conference. I'll be working with Greg to schedule that to basically explain all of it and the requirements and, you know, different things that may trigger being able to incorporate these new performance measures into your planning documents, like such as the LRTP or TIP documents. So our deadline for doing that is the end of the year. So it's going to be coming up pretty quickly, but we'll have different subject matter experts from our office, so some of our engineers and safety folks who will be able to kind of answer any particular questions that you have, and we'll also during that meeting be looking to see what targets you plan on adopting, whether you'll be going with the state's targets or creating your own, and kind of your process of, are you going to I guess announce it or have board involvement, board approval, like formal documentation, different things of that sort. So I just wanted to let you all know that that's coming down the line. It's new to all of us. We're all trying to work our way around, trying to figure out how this all works. But our office has created a bunch of different little spreadsheets and matrices for each individual MPO to say, okay, if you modify your LRTP, you're going to have to incorporate these different performance measures by these dates. So that was rolled out at MPOAC a little while ago, but I just wanted to give the reminder that we will be discussing that with the executive directors, and it will be open for staff as well. You can include FDOT. We're leaving that at your discretion at who you want to invite.
Them out.
So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. One last meeting.
Just to kind of clarify what Danielle's referring to, if you look back at the retreat agenda, on item number 6, the congestion management plan update, that's where we'll be talking about some of the very things that she's mentioning here, so.
All right. Suzanne?
Betsy, to answer your question, it is at 1:30 Central, 2:30 Eastern.
Okay.
And again, this will be in the email. I'll be sending that to Greg. I'll send it right out afterwards, and then we'll send a reminder out about a week beforehand.
Midway.
In Midway, or you can, again, it'll be via webinar, so you can be in Jefferson County and attend.
In your pajamas.
Okay. Greg, is it possible that we could add, or I would like to add, maybe an update on the FSU Southwest Sector Plan to our retreat?
Well, that's number 2, the Southwest area.
Well, I saw you had,
Plan.
There you go.
Yeah,
I saw you had kickoff. I didn't know if that was different than an update.
No, well, that's kind of kickoff, I guess, / update.
That's
You know,
okay.
We'll just be really getting started at that point, so that's why I listed as a kickoff.
All right. I didn't know what that kickoff meant. Okay. All right, well, then that's covered. The other question that I had is, and this is kind of self-serving, but it's not. The segment of Orange Avenue that we're looking at widening, Suzanne, that area is so congested now. I mean, there certain times of day, that traffic backs up from Spring Hill Road all the way back to Pasco, sometimes as far back as FAMU DRS. Is there any way we can fast track that widening?
They're doing the study, but we have a PD&E funded, all right?
Right.
So I can't say we can fast track it other than through your prioritization list.
Okay.
When we do the PD&E, of course, we will look to segment improvements. So of course, the most critical segment would be first. And one thing I can say that it will expedite it a little better, a little more, is that the Florida has been given the NEPA approval process. So we now complete environmental reviews on behalf of FHWA, and it reduces that time by about 6 months.
Okay.
So if we are just, again, keep working to back from PD&E into design, into construction, that's the way to fast track it, is through this process.
Okay. And on FSU home football weekends, it's even worse because they direct traffic from the stadium down Lake Bradford Road to Orange Avenue.
Right.
And it's just outrageous. I mean, and this is almost any time of the week. Weekends, early morning, afternoons, when school is in. It's just amazing how congested Orange Avenue has become.
Yeah, I would anticipate, though, that you look at the right-of-way needs in there.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're going to be significant.
That's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be a cost.
It's tight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a motion? Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Motion and second. We stand adjourned.
I hope that was quick enough for you.
Armband?
I got to make sure, though, I get the right message out. We'll try on the trees. The biggest problem is your utility.